Hey guys, happy Juneteenth um, holiday. It's the first ever Juneteenth holiday that is a federal holiday, the first federal holiday created, um, instituted 1983 when Martin Luther King Day was instituted. And it is a very important milestone day for American history. It is the day in 1865 that slavery ended. Slavery in this country, of course, existed before there was a country. It started in 1619, hence the name of the proposed 1619 Project. Um, and it extended until the American Revolution, up until 1865. Of course, most historians count the end of the Civil War as April 9th, but because at that time there was only telegrams and there was no internet, no TV, no radio. By the time it reached the city of Galveston in Texas and it reached the slave population there, it was several months later, and it was June 19th. So Appomattox, Robert E. Lee surrendered Appomattox to Ulysses S. Grant. The South surrenders, and the South loses the Civil War. That is April 9th. And then slavery officially ends in all 50 states in on June 19th, 1865. And for years after that, African Americans, the African American community, especially in the South, celebrated this holiday as an unofficial holiday, Emancipation Day or Juneteenth. Um, Last year, of course, I made a video, go back, look in the archives, about Donald Trump doing a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which, of course, is an insult if you consider the massacre in Tulsa in 1921, the bombing of Black Wall Street. Happy Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, Lisa. The bombing of Black Wall Street um, in 1921, and he chooses to do his first rally back on Juneteenth. That was bullshit. But this year it was finally signed into law, a federal holiday, as it should be. There are several people complaining about it. One of them is Kansas Owens, saying that the only true American Independence Day is July 4th. That every other Independence Day is irrelevant. Well, that's bullshit, because on July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, half the population, more than half, was enslaved. There were free Black Americans, of course, but most Black Americans were slaves. So how can Black Americans be excited about July the 4th? Only only white Americans. It's only a holiday for white Americans. Read Frederick Douglass's speech that he gave concerning why African Americans should not celebrate July 4th. The struggle to get this holiday a holiday for years. But one prominent story that figures in is the story of Opal Lee, a woman in her 90s who, for 5 years, in order to get this holiday signed into law, walked from Fort Worth, Texas, to Washington, D.C. 5 years, this woman in her, well, now she's in her 90s, and she was in her 90s then because she was in her late 80s then because she was doing it for 5 years. So she walked all the way from Texas to Washington, D.C. in order to get this signed. But one thing I am happy with, besides not Ben Shapiro, besides Candace Owens, there is very little opposition to Juneteenth being a holiday. Back in the 1980s, when they wanted to make Martin Luther King's birthday a holiday, there was a lot of opposition. Jesse Helms, a famous senator, was one of them. Um, Public Enemy even made a song. Public Enemy even made a song, On My Way to Arizona, a Public Enemy song about the state of Arizona refusing to recognize Martin Luther King holiday, even after it was made a federal holiday. For Juneteenth, I don't really. Lisa says, yeah, Miss Lee is a great lady. For Juneteenth, I don't really see a lot of opposition against it from a lot of white people. Of course, we live in a different time than in the 80s, so that's the good. The opposition that I do see, and it is legitimate, is people don't want Juneteenth to become a commercialized holiday in the way that Mother's Day is, in the way that Thanksgiving is, in the way that in in really okay. Lisa says there were like 13 people in Congress that were against it. It's funny because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be against making April 9th Confederate Day or whatever to honor Confederate soldiers. She says one reason because of so many other holidays. Yeah, but why don't we get rid of Columbus Day? I mean, Columbus did not discover America, so there's no need for that. And technically, isn't Veterans Day the same thing as Memorial Day? I mean, I know the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day is one honors the living and one honors the dead. But here's the thing. Even if you look at Abraham Lincoln's speech, the Gettysburg Address, what he says about what happened in the Civil War was that America received a new birth of freedom. So yes, we as a country, we quote unquote, we as a country had our Independence Day, July 4th. But then the country ripped apart. So we needed another Independence Day for the other half of the population that was enslaved during July 4th. It's no, it's no, it's no, um, it's no big deal. I mean, and if you look at certain religions and certain ethnic groups, like for example, Jewish people, they have tons of holidays marking every step in their history. Passover, Yom Kippur, Purim, right? Uh, Tisha B'av, when the temple was destroyed both times. So, and those Jewish people get time off. In fact, here in New York City, on the two Jewish high holy days, which I made a video about, everybody gets off on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So even though they aren't federal holidays, people still get off because a lot of the teachers are of Jewish descent. So having this to honor African American heritage and to as a second Independence Day for people that couldn't really celebrate their Independence Day on July the 4th is totally it's not a big deal to me. But again, people are concerned about the commercialization of it, just like they are with Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, which Christmas, when the Pilgrims settled on in here in the United States, Christmas was not even a real holiday because most most pilgrims were, well, all pilgrims were fundamentalist Christians who believed that Christmas origins lie in the pagan festival of the Roman pagan festival of Saturnalia and the Germanic pagan festival of Yule. So Christmas wasn't initially celebrated in the early days of the American colonies. That's why they had Thanksgiving. So, and I have a video on that. Um, Also, I have a video on, and it's entitled "What Does 1492 Mean to You?" And it's talking about why we shouldn't even have Columbus Day, because Columbus Day, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. That's number one. There were already natives living here. Two, he didn't discover anything in the continental United States. He landed in the Caribbean islands. Three, he was a mass murderer and responsible for genocide. Lisa is saying this day did not get taught in high school. That's true. I didn't find out about this day until, um, years and years later when Lisa and I went to this festival. It was like 2010 or 11. We went to this festival in Malik Al-Shabazz. It was put on by the Malik Al-Shabazz Mosque. Malik Al-Shabazz, of course, Malcolm X. And we went there, and they were putting on this festival. She had gone a year previously with her sister, and she told me about it. And before that, I didn't even know such a thing as Juneteenth existed. They never talked about it in school. In fact, we didn't even talk about April 9th. We didn't even talk that much about the Civil War. The Civil War was glossed over. The reasons for the Civil War were glossed over. We just knew that slavery ended, and and that was it. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. We never learned about John Brown's rebellion. We never learned about Nat Turner. We never learned about Gabriel Prosser. We never learned any of that stuff. Just the Confederacy lasted for 4 years, and that was it. And Robert E. Lee was one of the generals, and he surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, and that was it. We Gettysburg Address. We never learned about Shiloh. We never learned about Vicksburg. We never learned about Fredericksburg. Just it started in Fort Sumter. It ended in Appomattox Courthouse. There was slavery, and that was it. We Some of us didn't even know that Texas was a slave state, but there's a reason for that deliberately, though. Most of the textbooks are put out by Texas. Most of the textbooks in all subjects, not just history, all subjects are published in Texas. If you get a calculator in math class, it'll say on the top of it Texas Instrument. So Texas is not going to put something that is against Texas in it. And the fact that Texas was one of the states the last state to end slavery doesn't really make Texas look all that good in the eyes of students. Like, you're learning about the Texas Revolution, you're learning about the Alamo, the Battle of San Jacinto, Santa Ana and Davy Crockett, yeah, that makes Texas look tremendous. You know what I mean? But this doesn't bid well in overall Texas history to have Texas be the last of the slave states. So they never even really mentioned that Texas was a slave state all that much in textbooks. Hell, they don't even really mention the history of New York as it pertains to slavery, which I grew up thinking. Here's what I grew up thinking about slavery. It wasn't until Lisa and I went also to the African burial ground in New York that I even learned that New York was one of the last northern states to end slavery. To end slavery. I mean, when we learned about New York history, we never learned about. Yeah, we learned about Sojourner Truth. Um, we, we learned about Sojourner Truth, but we never really learned that Sojourner Truth was enslaved in New York. Um, Lisa is saying that people are saying that it's a distraction from George Floyd's police reform bill. Yeah, kind of, but not kind of. It actually is. But um, I mean, they're not going to reform the police. They're not. You know, you're asking for a lot. You know what I mean? Even though slavery has been over for over 100 years in 1865 or whatever, it, still there is racism in this country. Still there is discrimination in this country against African Americans. It doesn't. The story didn't start with slavery and it doesn't end with slavery. You know what I mean? Because as I mentioned during the Revolutionary War, there was free slaves. I mean, there was free African Americans there, but that didn't end discrimination against them. In fact, in the North, when they got to the North, there were black codes instituted. I mean, black codes instituted that um, Jim Crow later copied off those same black codes used in the North to segregate black people. So when slavery was over nationwide later on, as many people know, in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, they just copied the black codes that were already in use in the North and instituted them worldwide, nationwide. So it's always one step forward, two steps back. You want the conservatives to agree to something, it has to be something in the past so they can say, yeah, you know, we supported that, but they supported it retrospectively. They didn't really support it at the time it was going on. Like you hear a lot of conservatives today praising Martin Luther King, saying that he was a Republican, which he was not. He was unaffiliated because he was a pastor. Pastors at that time, separation of church and state, they didn't get involved in politics. Neither did Billy Graham, another famous pastor. His father was a Republican, but that was only because Democrats who controlled the South at that time wouldn't allow black people to register as anything else but Republican because they wouldn't. Southern Democrats wouldn't accept black members. But they always say, "Oh, Martin Luther King was a Republican." Well, again, he wasn't, and they praise Martin Luther King in juxtaposition to Malcolm X. Meanwhile, during his life, they didn't. The conservatives during that time, both in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party, the Southern Democrats, they didn't support Martin Luther King. They didn't support even in the '60s. They killed him. Let alone in the '80s, they did not support making his birthday a holiday. They praise him. They praise him in death, but they hated him in life. It's kind of like that with a lot of historical figures. Okay, Winston Churchill and the British hated Mahatma Gandhi, but now in the textbooks, people praise Mahatma Gandhi or Mahatma Gandhi as this kind of hero. You know, people, Jesus Christ, people didn't start loving Jesus Christ besides his disciples until long after he was not living on this earth anymore. You know what I mean? So anybody can praise somebody retrospectively. Even the people that praise George Floyd, they praise George Floyd now. They praise only the name of George Floyd. They're building statues to George, but they didn't. They're not going to do anything about police reform to stop the creation of future George Floyds and future Breonna Taylors. So I feel like sleepy Joe Biden, President Biden, he felt like he had to to do something in order to appease the African American community, because after the shooting in Atlanta, which I have a video on, that they said was a racist shooting because of Trump instigating anti-Asian hate. After hashtag fight Asian hate, they passed a crime bill against anti-Asian crime bill after what happened in ATL. But they never passed an African American hate crime bill. And African American hate crimes happen 10 or 20 more times than anti-Asian. Anti-Asian hate really is not a thing in America. Yeah, because of Trump and the coronavirus. But most people, because he called it a China flu, but he only called it a China flu because it really did come from China. You know what I mean? Like, not necessarily that he hated or despised Asians. He called it the Asian China flu because it's really from China. You know what I mean? So, um, in history, there's the Spanish flu, which the Spanish flu of 1918. Is this anti-Spanish hate? No. What the kid did was a hate crime. Yes, I'm not taking anything away from that. But why, when there is an Asian bill, you'll push the Asian bill through right away, but African Americans been asking for an anti-hate crime bill for decades, and you do nothing about it. And not for nothing, but it was the African American community that came out heavily for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It wasn't Asians. Asians were not the driving force behind the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 2020. Not Asians. It was African Americans. It was African Americans who felt that they were screwed over in a Stacey Abrams election in 2018 that were the ones that really came out and spoke, came out in droves. But you gave Asians something and you gave African Americans nothing. And you gave them this holiday, which is fine, and nobody is complaining about it, and it's good they have it. But we need something now. We need something tangible. A holiday that people are just going to bastardize and mock African Americans probably, and dress in dashikis and dress in kente cloth and all that stuff. That's all right. But what about something about now? The struggle that we face now is not slavery, chattel slavery, but police brutality. What about something about that? So that's what a lot of people are fed up about. Symbolic victories. Okay, instead of, like in the 80s, instead of Ronald Reagan dealing with the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic that hit the African American community, and pushing out Haitian immigrants, blaming the AIDS epidemic on Haitian immigrants in the 80s. What does he go and do? Sleight of hand. He goes and gives the African American community Martin Luther King's holiday. Slavery is another example. During the Missouri Compromise in the 1850s, they didn't want to end slavery or abolish slavery completely. So what did they do? Sleight of hand. They gave the slave owners Missouri, and they created a whole new state of Maine in order to appease the abolitionists. So it's all about appeasement. They don't want to go full throttle and give them what they really want, which is an anti-black hate bill. Biden. So what does he do? He says, I did something. I created Juneteenth. That was what I'll be known for. Instead of doing something that really matters. Not that Juneteenth doesn't really matter. It's great for history, and it's great to know about, and it's great to have more holidays. But you could have did Juneteenth and the hate crime bill. Why either or? Why not the Juneteenth hate crime bill? That is a direct fight against white supremacy. You could have did both, but you chose to do one and not the other. And it's a particular slap in the face when it comes to Sleepy Joe, because he's the one. I mean, we are the community, us, the African American and Latino community in New York. We're the ones that got him in. He would have never, ever gotten in had it not been for minority communities, particularly African Americans. They were pushing the fight for him. And sorry if anybody's offended that I used, Trump's nickname for him, Sleepy. But on this, he is sleepy, like, he's asleep at the wheel on this. You know what I mean? Like, for example, when a community gets you into power, you owe that community something. You know what I mean? When they come out in droves for you, when they're the reason you're there, like with Trump, with the white supremacist Trump gave the white supremacists everything they wanted. He gave the Jewish people, who was his big supporters, he gave them everything they wanted. He made Jerusalem the capital of Israel in 2017. He did for them. Sleepy Joe, this is what he does. This is his thank you to the African American community, and it didn't go all the way. It didn't go all the way. But other communities, when they want something, they get it done. In 2012, another example, one of the biggest communities that got Barack Obama elected in 2012 was the LGBT community. What did Obama do for the LGBT community? He passed several hate crime laws for the LGBT community. He put in judges that made it Oberfield versus Hodges in 2014. He made that possible for the LGBT community, Barack Obama. So here I gave two examples of presidents who were elected on a certain platform and did for two disadvantaged, marginalized communities, the LGBT community and the Jewish community. what they were put in office to do for them. Joe Biden was put in office to help the African American community against police brutality. He was not put in office to by his African American constituents to make another holiday. That's nice. That's a nice gesture, but that's like that's like me asking for money and you giving me a high five. Like it's cool you gave me a high five, but bro, I asked you for money. Like he was put in there to do something, and he didn't do it for that constituency that rode hard for him. And I'm disappointed in President Biden for that. People say, oh, well, Trump didn't give the white supremacists a wall. Yeah, he didn't, because most of the white supremacists that elected him for the wall knew the wall wasn't going to happen. It wasn't possible. But a hate crime bill is possible. Barack Obama, another example. Barack Obama was elected to put in place Obamacare. And some people say he went halfway with it, but at least he did something. At least he made a step. The creation of a Juneteenth holiday is not even a step in the right direction. About, concerning the issue of police brutality. Lisa says the wall was already there anyway. Yeah, but the way he made it out to be, Lisa, was like, it was going to be like a massive wall like China got, right? Which didn't even work in Chinese history because the Mongols still got through. But, you know what I mean? Or like the one Israel got, like the Iron Dome that Israel got. And Lisa says, oh, and remember when Kamala Harris said America wasn't a racist country? And people was like, what? Well, yeah. Because, again, it's like within the Heights. You can go woke, but you can't go too woke. You go too woke, you go broke. You know what I mean? So they can pick on certain targets, certain easy targets. Like they can go after Trump because nobody liked Trump anyway. You know what I mean? Because of the corona, they feel like he was a failed president. They can go after white supremacists from 100 and something years ago, like Robert E. Lee or the Confederates, because really, in reality, who but hardcore Southern secessionists is really going to support Robert E. Lee or the Confederates? So they can go after that. They can go after Nazis, because Nazis existed like 70 something years ago, and it's something in the history books. But they can't go after the boogeymen and the bad guys of today. They can't go after the bad guys of today because the bad guys of today are the bad guys of today. But who really cares? Like, okay, he's talking about the Confederacy, but the Confederacy is, that was back in the day. This morning, I told my mom about Juneteenth being instituted as a federal holiday. And one of the things she said, and this really hit home with me, was like, yeah, but slavery's been over for so long. So what is that basically saying? That's saying, okay, you're fighting battles from 100 and something years ago, but how about to fight the battles against white supremacy that exist today? Like police brutality. Okay, nobody is going to sit there except for the hardcore crazy neo-Confederates and say, yes, the Confederacy was right. You're not saying really anything by saying that. You know, that's like saying I have, that's like saying I have sex with my spouse. Yeah, and you know, like you know, like you're supposed to. Like, okay, the Confederacy fought against the United States government. Nobody would take their side except for all the hardcore people. So Opal Lee and people that fought for it, I'm happy for them, and I hope it becomes something that we learn about in history. But the point of history, the reason why we learn about this stuff, like oftentimes you'll hear history students say, "Well, why do I have to know about this stuff? This was so long ago, right? It was 300 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever." But the point of it is to so that history doesn't repeat itself. So that we don't make the same mistakes. But while we're in the midst of making those same mistakes, we are acknowledging the wrongs of the past. But okay, you've acknowledged the wrongs of the past, but how about the wrongs of the present? How about the wrongs that are going to happen in terms of white supremacy in the future? Lisa saying, "Wow, she got." She said, "I just got an email from she got a spam email, and it said something to the effect to support black restaurant ordered through the app Postmates. The commercialization, of course, the commercialization of the holiday is happening, and then." The messed up part about this, guys, is that Biden will get the credit for it historically. The white people that put it through will get the credit for it historically, just like the white people that fought for the Union side during slavery got the credit, and not the abolitionists. Not the abolitionists, not the people who fought against like Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. She gets more credit in history than Nat Turner. People that were white conductors and the abolitionists and the Quakers and stuff, they get more credit in history than the freaking people who fought hard for it. The abolitionists, the real hardcore black abolitionists. Why do we learn more about Harriet Beecher Stowe in history or Abraham Lincoln in history than we actually learn about Frederick Douglass in history or Nat Turner in history? You know what I mean? Like, of course, the black people started the abolitionist movement first. They were the ones that got on board first. If you go back and watch the Lincoln and Douglas debates in 1860, Lincoln wasn't even for ending slavery. He became for ending slavery, and when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, it was only under the states he had no jurisdiction on under anyway. He was completely for only preserving the Union. His quote in the beginning was, "If I could preserve the Union by ending slavery in all the states, I would. If I could preserve the Union by ending slavery in some of the states, I would. If I could preserve the Union by ending slavery in none of the states, I would do that too." His primary objective was preserving the Union, not ending slavery. Same with the civil rights movement. People give Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy a lot of credit for the passage of the Civil Rights Bill in 1965 and the passage of Civil Rights Bill in 64 and the Voting Rights Act in 65. But if you go back and look at the debate in 1960 that Kennedy had with Nixon, Kennedy really wasn't for civil rights. He wasn't for ending segregation. He was for it later. Yeah. So, what happened with this Juneteenth holiday? People like Opal Lee, people that fought hard to get this Juneteenth holiday to be a federal holiday, They won't get the credit. People will get the credit is Joe Biden. Joe Biden in the history will get the credit for it, like Ronald Reagan got the credit for signing Martin Luther King's holiday into law, like Johnson got the credit for the Voting Rights Civil Rights Bill, and like Abraham Lincoln and Harriet Beecher Stowe got the credit for ending slavery. They'll get the credit. People who was really there on the ground won't get the credit. How about this? How about we make May 19th a federal holiday? The birthday of Malcolm X. They're not going to do that. How about we make Medgar Evers' birthday a federal holiday? They wouldn't do that. How about we make Nat Turner's rebellion a federal holiday? They wouldn't do that. Or how about we start teaching what American history really was from an African American perspective? They wouldn't do that. It was sort of like when Trump always talked about, well, I gave, under my administration, more African Americans were economically employed than anything else, like in the Platinum Plan that Ice Cube was down with. Okay. But you weren't doing anything about police brutality. So it's just like Biden. If we're going to hold Trump accountable, we got to hold Biden accountable. We got to hold them all accountable, because Democrats or Republicans, they are, it's like Jose Marti said about Cuba and Puerto Rico, they are two wings of the same bird. That's why they say left wing and right wing. They're part of the same government. So we got to hold them both accountable. We got to hold Trump just as much accountable as Joe Biden. We got to hold Barack Obama accountable. We got to hold George W. Bush accountable, Clinton, all of them. The fact of the matter is, Joe Biden is a type of politician that will say he's a duplicitous politician. He's a type like Lincoln, like Kennedy. He's a type that he will say anything or do anything openly. Okay, yeah, Lisa says Opal was there when he signed. But will Opal get the credit? That's what I'm saying, Lisa. In the future, will her and other activists, will her story of how she walked from Texas to Washington, D.C. for 5 years and being an 80-something-year-old woman, will she even get the credit in the future for signing it? I'm sure that there were activists that were pushing for Martin Luther King's birthday to be recognized as a holiday before it was, and you don't hear about them now. All you hear about is Reagan put it through. The important thing is you got to remember that people that get the credit, people that pushed, that were there before it was a thing. Because that's the problem with African American history. The people that are black, we talked about this in the Heights, black or Afro-Latinx or whatever you want to call it, African American, whatever operative word you want to use, never get the credit for the real things that they accomplished. People say that Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll, even though Chuck Berry created it. People say that Benny Goodman was the king of swing, even though Duke Ellington was doing swing music before Benny Goodman even knew what a clarinet was. The tendency, yeah, Lisa, you're right. The tendency is to either de-racialize the person, take their race out of it, and just say, well, it's for everybody, or to make the person white, the person that created, make them white. You know what I'm saying? That happens with religion. Okay? All the people in the Bible, besides the Romans and the Greeks, were all Middle Easterners, people of color. Some of them Black people like Simon of Cyrene and helped Jesus carry the cross in Via Dolorosa. But all of them today are considered to be, all of them, you look at all the pictures and the Renaissance paintings, they're all white, right? Rock and roll, like I said, they said was created by Elvis Presley. Black people were doing rock and roll before Elvis even knew what a pair of blue suede shoes even was. Swing, they said, was created by Benny Goodman. But before Benny Goodman was doing his thing, and he even knew what a clarinet was, Duke Ellington created swing. Louis Armstrong created swing. The black people of New Orleans created swing. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders gets the credit. Meanwhile, black people been having fried chicken recipes in the South and during slavery that nobody ever knew about. Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion in boxing, nobody gives him any credit for anything. People always talk about the first big boxing star was Jack Dempsey. But Jack Johnson was a bigger star before Jack Dempsey was. Even in something like, okay, you don't really want to compare this, right? Because this is crime. But even in crime, like organized crime, we talk about John Gotti, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel. How about the guys like Frank Matthews, Frank Lucas? A movie was made about him, like in 2006. But before that, nobody nationwide really knew who he was. Never got the credit. Meanwhile, he pushed more weight than any other gangster in all of Harlem. Bumpy Johnson, same thing. Frank Matthews, another Harlem African American legend in the drug game, he got away with it. They still don't know where he is to this day. So the names of African American people, whether they be on the right side of the law or the wrong side of the law, they never get credit. They never get credited. You hear about Christopher Columbus, but you never hear about the black man who was on the ship with him, Pedro Alonso Nino. So Lisa is right. Opal Lee is getting the credit now. But what I hope that Opal Lee and other black activists like her get the credit after her. Like, it's cool that Barack Obama is the first black president, right? But how about the people that ran before Barack Obama? How about Shirley Chisholm? Okay, when we learn about medieval history, the Middle Ages, we always learn about King Richard the Lionheart, but we never learn about Mansa Musa, who was way richer than King Richard the Lionheart, who went to Mecca on the Hajj in the 1200s, and he had so much gold that the price of gold dropped in Egypt. They couldn't believe how much gold it was. Mansa Musa was the richest king in all of history, way richer than King Richard the Lionheart. We hear about all the famous popes, right? Pope Urban II, Pope Leo III, but we never really hear about the black popes, the African popes that were there before all those other popes. You never learned that Saint Augustine was African. A lot of the church fathers, Athanasius of Alexander, African. Never hear anything about that. Never hear about the Queen of Sheba and Solomon in the Bible, even though it's explicitly mentioned that Solomon and Sheba, that Sheba, the Queen of Sheba, was black. You never hear anything about that stuff. That stuff is completely either, like I said, either they make it for everybody, like the N word. Okay, the N word was a resistance of, it was a word used to degrade and down black people and dehumanize black people, take away their tribal names like Yoruba, like Lunda, like Hausa, the different African ethnicities and tribalisms. And it was a way to dehumanize them and trivialize them to just their color. And they took the word during the time of Richard Pryor first and then later with NWA. They took the word and they made it into something of a brotherhood that it represents for the African American race. Right? And then they said, they started to argue, well, it should be a word for everybody. So what's going to happen, I hope not, I hope it doesn't happen, I hope I'm wrong, is that Juneteenth is going to become like, oh, as soon as you say, well, it's a holiday to celebrate African American heritage and how African American people overcame slavery, people will start to say, well, it's a holiday for everybody. No, it's not a holiday for everybody. You know, everybody can celebrate it, but you're going to then strip the significance of the holiday away from what it really means. Because as soon as it becomes for everybody, then it loses its potency. Like, again, right? And they're going to start saying it's for everybody. That's what happened with Christianity. That's what happened with the Jewish religion. That's what happened with rock and roll. That's what happened with jazz. That's what happened with the N word. That's what happened with rap. That that always is happening to black people and people of color. The race of the person is being taken away. They'll be deracialized, and they'll say, well, just for everybody. And the significance of them being black figures or figures of color will be taken away, be stripped away. And so it's just for everybody. Or they will give the credit to somebody white and say, well, yeah, Martin Luther King was the one really, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and all the NAACP activists were the ones really pushing for um, pushing for desegregation. But remember, it was Lyndon Johnson that made it happen. So you're taking the credit away from Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and all the civil rights people at Selma, and you're giving it to a white guy. Yeah. You're taking away the abolitionist credit, the black abolitionists like Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass, and all the other ones, and you're giving the credit to Abraham Lincoln, who didn't even want to end slavery. Like, okay, twerking. Twerking started amongst black communities in Louisiana. Now, twerking, oh, they say, well, twerking is for everybody. Huh? Dreads are for everybody. Mhm. Rastafarian, that's for everybody. People say, oh, you can't stop me from wearing dreads. That's for everybody. When it's something black and it's something relating to black people or people of color, they say it's for everybody. Well, it's for everybody. But if it's something Caucasian or white that they started, that's not for everybody. How do you know that to be true? Look at the reaction to Little Nas X's Old Town Road video. They knocked Little Nas X Old Town Road song off of the country charts because they said it wasn't country enough. So rap music, that's for everybody. But country, that's for us. That's not for everybody. In the Heights, you can't have too many Afro Latinx people in it because that's for Hispanics. That's not for everybody. Black movies like Tyler Perry movies. Oh, why aren't there more white people in it? He should make movies for everybody. Put John Boyega in Star Wars. That's not for everybody. That's for us. That's the way they look at it. Black stuff for everybody. White and non-black stuff for only that exclusive group. You know, kung fu movies. Black people can't represent that because that's for Asians. But apparently, Asians, according to China Mac and other Asian rappers on the West Coast, Chinese rappers could say the N word because the N word, that's for everybody. You understand how that logic goes? One group, their things are for everybody. The other group is only for that group. Black lives, in other words, Black Lives Matter. That's wrong to have Black Lives Matter. Because that mentions something explicitly black. But Israel is only for Israel. You can't have other groups go to Israel, right? Africans can't. When Netanyahu was there, Africans, Eritreans, Ethiopians, and stuff were being kicked out of Israel. I have a video on it because Israel, that's for Jews, but Black Lives Matter, that should be for everybody. You see the double standard? Asian movies. Oh, people can't dress up as something Asian, Chinese, Japanese, whatever, and imitate that. Even though a lot of black people, especially black men, love anime, and a lot of black people from back in the day loved kung fu movies. But we can't be that because that's for Asians. That's not for everybody. Little Nas X can't do country music because that's for white people. That's not for everybody. But anybody can do rap. That's for everybody. See the logic? Everything. Either have everything for everybody or have everything for exclusive groups. You can't have some things for everybody and some things for only exclusive groups. You know what I mean? That's not fair. Why is only black things for everybody or supposed to be for everybody? Well, all lives. Oh, we black activists say Black Lives Matter, and then people turn around and say, well, all lives matter. Black activists like Charleston White, and you may not agree with everything that Charleston White says, but he turns around and he says, I don't agree with Asian rappers, Hispanic rappers, and white rappers saying N word, and that's my prerogative for them not to say that. When people say, well, he can't say that, that's wrong to say that, because the N word, that's for everybody. You know, so it's gonna happen like that with Juneteenth, where to the point where people are gonna start to celebrate it, like Lisa said. White people are gonna start wearing dashikis, and we're gonna say, "Well, that's wrong. That's cultural appropriation." And they're gonna say, "Well, not really, because Juneteenth for everybody is is Chinese New Year for everybody." I mean, yes, you can celebrate it, but if I started walking around in Chinese garb, making eyes like they were Chinese, people would say that I'm being, I'm being racist, right? And they're saying that I'm yellow facing. If Passover, and I go compare Juneteenth to Passover, right? Okay, because both involve the freeing of slaves. That's why I said a way to counter the people that are against Juneteenth, just say, well, what about Passover? But okay, let's take Passover for an example. If I started to say that Passover represents me as a Hispanic American. People would say, well, it doesn't really represent you because it's only for the Jewish people, right? And it would be right to say that. But people still get off. You know what I mean? People still don't have to work that day. But that doesn't give me the right to start dressing up in Hasidic garb, acting like I'm the Baal Shem Tov with two curls on the side and everything and chuckling. People will say that I'm making fun of or I'm mocking the Jewish ethnicity or the Jewish race or the Jewish religion. You know what I mean? So, yes, it's going to be a holiday. It's a federal holiday that's created for quote unquote everybody. But have respect and don't paint your faces. Don't. It's not Halloween. You know, it's a holiday that is serious. That it represents an end for a time of suffering and a time of suffering that still continues to this day. And don't let it be the end of your fight and your struggle against racial equality. Let it just be the start. And don't depend on these politicians to be the ones to make it into law. Fight for yourself like Opal Lee did. And if you have to walk from state to state across several states in order to make that happen, make that happen. Never stop fighting to end racial discrimination and police brutality in this country against any group. Don't just say, well, okay, well, they got the Asian hate crime bill passed. So, or I hashtag, hashtag RIP George Floyd. I celebrated Juneteenth, so I'm good. I voted for Obama, so I'm good. No, the struggle never stops. Peace. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button to see when my next video is coming out.